Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Wednesday, February 11th, 2026. It's just after 9 a.m. and we are continuing our walk through the FY27 budget. And this morning, we're delighted to have folks from the Public Utility Commission here with us to go over their budget. So welcome. If you would please introduce yourselves for the record and tell us what you got.
Great, thank you. Ed McNamara, Chair for the PUC.
And Ann Bishop, I'm the Public Utility Commission's Operations Director.
I'm Karen Hutchinson, I'm the business manager.
Oh,
Great, thanks. So today we'll just provide a quick overview of who we are, what we do. Obviously talk about the budget. So I believe that there are slides passed out. Slide 2 is just an overview. We generally regulate the retail side for electric and gas utilities, in addition to some portions of telecommunications and cable and water as well. There's a total of 27 positions currently at the commission, although 3 of those positions are vacant at the moment. Slide 3, the FY27 budget summary. It's important to recognize we get 0 general funds. About 3 years ago, we did receive, I think it was around $800,000 for the development of Clean Heat Standard. Those funds are gone at this point. So FY27, we are 100% special funded. And 96% of our funding comes from the gross receipts tax that regulated utilities pay. Application fees make up the remaining 4% roughly.
So are these application fees for various certificates? For solar, for wind, for I don't know what?
Yeah. So the majority of our work involves regulated utilities. So if, for example, Green Mountain Power or Belco comes in to propose a line, they're paying to upgrade a transmission line, for example. They pay gross receipts tax, so they're funding us and we don't charge them anything for our review. What we call merchant solar, these are sort of unregulated private for-profit solar developers. They don't pay anything in gross receipts tax, so they pay application fees to cover the review under Section 248 for STIP. So our FY27 proposed budget is roughly 5.3 million, which is an increase of a little bit less than 3% above the FY26 approved budget. So salaries and benefits make up over 87% of the commission's budget. And our FY27 projected revenues are 4.35 million. So reserves are being spent down to cover the difference.
Is that because what's happening with gross receipts tax? Is there any change in what revenue that you're getting from them? Is there any change in the way it's all happening?
So the rate has not changed since 2019. Gross receipts tax, the bulk of it is from the electric utilities, a significant portion also from gas. Gross receipts tax, the overall revenue for a utility will change depending on the weather. So every year it's sort of up and down. We have typically looked at gross receipts tax over the last 5 years and looked at the trend. It's generally been about 2.5% increase. 2.5% increase in revenues is below what we have seen in our expenditures when you just think of healthcare and retirement in particular, especially with an organization like us that are very heavy on the salaries, the
Right.
service.
Right. Healthcare comes up every day. Okay.
What do you have for reserves?
For reserves, it is 3.5 million roughly. Reserves were built up over the course of, I think, 15 years or so. And typically we use that to draw down, because we're special funded, we get the money from gross receipts tax, is it end of the fiscal year? So we're sort of carrying our own budget, and the reserves help that. So the reserves will dip down towards the end of the fiscal year and then essentially get reimbursed.
So you don't see any trends that might jeopardize your reserves?
Might jeopardize
Reserve. in terms of?
No, there's definitely jeopardy there because we have not put money into the reserves in a while. And so we're continuing to draw down. It's about $900,000 drawdown this year. And we project that it'll be about 3 years before we do not have sufficient reserves anymore. So
When will you do?
we're working on something right now. I mean, the options are either obviously increase revenues or you decrease services. So some of the thing might be an examination of what is it that the commission does, or there's certain things that we should not be doing, or that are more appropriate located somewhere else. So those are not easy things. We are, neither one of those, particularly at the moment, are easy, especially recognizing what's happening across the board for everybody's budget.
Yeah.
It's difficult to come in and ask for an increase. So we're not asking for any increases this year, recognition of things are tough all over, and we want to make sure we're very precise and targeted in what we're asking, and potentially look at some combination of increase in revenues, decrease in work.
So if you said rates haven't increased since 2019, prior to 2019, how often were rates increased?
Very rarely. When I think about 10 years, every 10 years.
No, they hadn't, but they hadn't changed in decades, many
Oh,
decades.
okay.
Okay,
2019 was the first time the rates changed in 40 years.
a very long time. Okay. Okay, and so you also talked about a little bit of volatility, which is weather dependent. I would imagine this year you had a lot of really cold days, so I'm guessing that you're gonna have a lot more revenue.
This year, we do expect more revenue, but it also depends on the sun as well, in terms of how much solar is deployed.
Yeah.
That's significant impact on the utilities, the electric utilities.
Is that
So
reduced there?
it reduces the revenues. And so it'll be interesting to see at the end of the year. I fully agree, the last 6 weeks with the cold, significantly more gas usage.
Yeah.
Really significant increase in electric costs.
Right.
Right now, I would probably predict that the overall gross receipts tax would go up, but you could have absolutely beautiful days, late April through August, and that might make up for it.
Yeah, well, and then if it's too hot over the summer, right, we end up with,
Yep. It's very
I mean,
difficult.
the solar's good, but also then there's the weight on the grid to,
The air conditioning load.
yeah, I have a Tesla Powerwall and they draw down on it when it gets really hot to, support the grid. It's not hot, so there are ways, for GMP at least.
Yes.
So you're doing any modeling? Because you've got, how these different factors impact you. So it seems like something that'd be amenable to modeling to give you an idea of at least some range in terms of predict when you might get in trouble and what you might have to do about it, or what drivers are causing the problem.
Yeah, so I should have also mentioned early on, the Department of Public Service is also funded primarily through gross receipts tax, and they're actually the ones who collect it. They're the ones who typically project it, and we work with them as if we think those projections are reasonable. They have started recently looking at what are the policy impacts of, for example, advocating for electric vehicles and heat pumps. We had, for the longest time, expected to see an increase in revenues associated with that increased kilowatt hour sales from EVs and from heat pumps. It's not happening as quickly as we thought, but we're still diving into that in terms of, is it going to be a linear? Is it going to be more of a sort of a U shape? When will that appear? And this is all forecasting, modeling, and again, one cold winter can throw everything off. So, but we're definitely looking at it and working with the department on that as well.
You're forecasting human behavior, so it's always interesting.
Exactly.
Forecasting human behavior, and also some of the significant changes that we're seeing with, for example, the tax credit for EVs.
Mhm.
that going away, it's not clear what that looks like now. We don't have a full year of data to understand how many less EVs are being sold. That was the primary driver of kilowatt hour sale, increased kilowatt hour sales. So
Okay, heat pumps. These are, I guess in Vermont, a lot of times they're bought for summer air conditioning. And then you can also use them for heat.
Yep.
So instead of having an oil bill or a natural gas bill, you have an electric bill that goes up.
yes,
And so you say you don't see any, it seems to me that that's, would the gross receipt impact upwards?
it should be a gross receipts impact upwards, and it's not happening as quickly as we thought. And I think it is being offset by the solar. By the increase.
A lot of people have both. I'm one of them, but
If
our electric bill has gone up quite a bit, I can tell you this winter. And the solar, and in the winter, the solar, you don't get as much solar use power. Right, so.
Yeah, and your EV battery usage is nowhere near as efficient in the winter time.
Right, exactly.
But there is generally, I'm interested in terms of if there's a correlation between if you have a net metering system on your roof, it's more economically advantageous for you to do electric vehicles and to do heat pumps.
Right.
So that might be part of it, is the people putting heat pumps and EVs at the moment are actually not really contributing much to the or not as much, many kilowatt hour sales.
Yeah.
As I would have expected.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I'm sure there's a seasonality, but if they're doing some modeling over at DPS, that'll be interesting to hear what they come up with. Okay.
Yep.
We got to page 3.
Great. So there's a couple of slides just to give you a context of what we're doing. Slide 4, commission's workload. This is 2025. So more than 2,200 new cases were filed with the commission. More than 12,300 filings are made in our online filing and case management system. So somebody's looking at pretty much all of those filings. That's not number of pages, that's just number of filings. More than 100 hearings and workshops, more than 1,200 orders, certificates of public goods. Certificates of public good are typically for new generation. That's the majority of those, and about 1,800 net metering CPGs.
Is that trending down? Those certificates of public good and net metering registration, or are they?
They're trending down to some degree. I don't have year over year. You have some?
Yes, the net metering registrations are trending down. I would say it's down maybe 20% from its peak, which was a couple of years ago. The larger net metering projects, we are also seeing fewer of those, in part as a result of some statutory changes. So those are trending down as well, but those were always a much smaller number.
Right.
So slide 5, we do track the timeframes for resolving cases. I've got the information right there. It's essentially, we break it out into percentage of cases. We break out net metering registration cases, and then also public inquiries as well. How quickly we respond. We are generally doing very well with those, and the outliers tend to be, obviously we occasionally make mistakes like every other agency, but a lot of times it is a miscommunication, not understanding some of our rules, some of the other aspects. And then some of the cases, quite honestly, somebody starts off strong and then runs into their own problems and keeps asking for delays. So it's a little mix of a little everything.
So what are your established timeframes? We can all make them up and make it look really good.
What do your customers think?
Please.
So they vary by the type of case, and in each type of case, we recognize that there are simple, medium, and complex cases. And this approach is modeled after something that's used by the Vermont judiciary, that is used comes from the National Center for State Courts, where they look at what are reasonable timeframes for the different kinds of cases? And yes, we do we have historical data on how long it takes us to process cases now that we have EPUC. And so just last year, we reevaluated our timeframes to make sure that they were still appropriate. Because when we had originally set the timeframes, they were before we had our a database to be able to do this, and we just sort of were kind of ballparking it. So when we did make some adjustments, some went up, some went down, based on how long is reasonable. As for what can make a case complex, a lot of that has to do with how many parties are in the case, how many issues are they raising? In other words, how contested is the matter before us? And we want to make sure that we give everybody the process that they need to fully explain their positions. And sometimes doing that means we're going to miss our time standard, even for a complex case. And in those situations, we prioritize making sure everyone has the time that they need to present their case rather than artificially cutting it.
What's the general timeframe for a simple case versus a complex case? Just have some.
So a net metering registration case, it's 15 days.
Okay.
A complex, large, 20 megawatt solar project, a year and a half would be the other end.
Yes.
And different types of cases fall in
So
between.
you assign, when the case comes in, you assign a timeframe?
Not exactly. We don't know when a case is first filed, how complex it's going to be yet, because we don't know how many people are going to want to participate in the case and how many issues they're going to raise. So we know what type of case it is.
Yeah.
So yes, it's assigned to that type of case.
Yeah.
But which bucket, simple, medium, or complex, we don't know yet until we're further into
Further
the
along.
case. Yeah.
Just to provide a little bit more context for that, just as an example, recently we approved the 20 megawatt solar project in Fairhaven, 100 acres. Not a single party moved to intervene. Town supported it. I don't think there was even an evidentiary hearing. Nobody requested it. Meanwhile, you can get these relatively small solar projects that are an acre or two, and one neighbor can considerably.
Right.
I'm thinking of it from the customer's perspective, your applicant's perspective. Are there any cases in which either the applicant or you have been very disappointed in not meeting the time frame? Something that you thought was going to be a reasonable amount of time and something turned out not to be. And so you, as the regulator, were disappointed in how that turned out. Or converse side, are there cases in which the applicant was very disappointed in how things turned out? Not the result, but the time frame. Something that
I would
have
say
been notable examples.
there was one solar project that took considerably longer, in part because of some staffing changes. Somebody had left the commission. The handoff was not as great as it should have been. So there were some delays in our processing the case. That's one example that I can think of, the most obvious one. I would say there's a lot of developers who do not think we process cases as quickly as we should. And to the point that Anne made earlier, however, Vermonters are entitled to due process. If there's a project being proposed next to them, they should have the ability to ask questions of the developer, file testimony if they want. And as soon as that happens, the case slows down considerably.
Okay, we've asked you lots of questions and we have limited time, so you make sure you let us know what you want us to know.
Okay. I'll just jump to the next slide. It's slide 6, major cases in 2025. You can read most of this here. Mentions 20 megawatt solar project, Fairhaven, for example. But what I want to draw your attention to is the first 4 bullets all relate to legislative, either reports or legislative direction. And this is one that as our budget gets tighter, as we're relying more on our reserves, I am being more vocal of saying we don't have the resources to do that. And so I just wanted to say that here, that we are taking steps. One of the things is going to be, one of our potential proactive actions is to not volunteer to take on work. 10 years ago, it was much easier to do that. If somebody wanted a report, we tend to be the more, we're independent of the administration. People wanted, a quote, more objective report. They usually looked at us. Now I'm saying we don't have the resources anymore. So if you're hearing that elsewhere, that's what that is.
Okay, so have you already presented in House Energy?
I did, and
I'm sure you probably mentioned that in that, yeah, okay. How are we doing so far this session?
Not great.
Did I do something? Well, nothing's come here, but.
Nothing's come. Some of the bills already have a couple reports and.
Yeah, and not every bill gets taken
No, no.
up past us.
So
I'm sure you're keeping.
no bill has passed yet that requires.
All right. Yes.
Yeah. So slide 7, known cases for 2026. This is just a preview of what we're doing. Green Mountain Power has a multi-year regulation plan. It's basically, I can't believe I was about to blank this, 4-year look at, over the course of 4 years, what is a predictable path for Green Mountain Power's electric rates? What are their capital costs going to be? And what are the base rates going to be? So we're going to spend a considerable amount of time on that. We also have Hyde Park Electric Department. I'm sure folks have heard about that. So looking at is the regulation of some of the small munis, in particular Hyde Park, is it appropriate? Department of Public Service is also doing considerable work on that. And then the last I just want to mention briefly is we have 3 energy efficiency utilities. They're on a 3-year cycle where we look at the budgets, what we expect of them, how many savings or how much savings they're going to get in different programs, what are those programs going to look like. So that's a considerable policy lift as well. And then we have, depending on the sunset of Section 248A in Title 30, we've typically done a fair amount of wireless telecommunication towers. We expect that to continue, and also net metering cases as well. All right, given the limited time, I'm just going to jump.
We're good on the budget and the funding sources.
Yeah. So I'm just going to, I mentioned the budget challenges. This is slide 10. I talked about this a little bit. Talked about the reserve. I want to just jump right to slide 12, which is sort of ups and downs. And mostly what is actually happening here. So in Act 18 from 2023, essentially the clean heat standard, in addition to the roughly $800,000 we received, we also received 3 positions,
Right.
2 or 1 limited service, 2 full-time. And so at the end of last year, after the legislature adjourned and there was no movement on the clean heat standard, we said to the administration, we have 3 positions, but we have no funding for them. So we asked them to take those positions away.
Yeah.
Because bluntly, if we do need to do anything on clean heat standard, we're going to need an appropriation. We need to come back and talk about positions again.
Right.
So that is actually mostly what's going on. Generally, there's been some increase in personal services, primarily healthcare and retirement, a little bit on salaries as well. Most of the numbers that we're seeing on here are actually the 3 clean heat positions being removed out of our budget. And that's the change for most of those, in addition to the vacancy savings, because we did have those, at least 2 of those positions vacant. So vacancy savings went up because we actually got rid of positions. And then at the very bottom of that chart, operating expenses, we're seeing increases as everybody else is. Fee for space, ADS. So generally what we're seeing.
Any questions from folks here? Asked you a lot today. It's always illuminating if you, I really enjoy that.
Well, I just, you've lost, I was poised, ready to hear you talk about budget challenges. And on slide 10, and then you quickly went to the ups and downs. And I'm just wondering, is there anything we should, you want us to know from that slide in terms of budget challenges?
Yeah, I could just talk very briefly on it.
We got that message.
Yeah. I'd already talked about it at a high level. This is a little bit more granular in terms of what we're seeing for a gap. Gross receipts tax, again, is about 96% of our funding. Historically, that was 100% of our work. It wasn't until probably 2015 or so that merchant generation, this is whether it's net metering, whether it's Encore, for example, is another developer that shows up a lot. Folks building solar projects that aren't the electric utility. So in 2019 is when we started receiving application fees. Application fees are not covering the amount of work associated with reviewing the merchant generation. So we pointed that out. That's mostly what's in the slide. And that is one of the things that we need to talk about, or we need to, when we come back with a more formal presentation or a formal solution is, for example, is it an increase in application fees and gross receipts tax, just application fees? We take 248 for merchant generation off the table and have it go to Act 250, which is what vast majority of other states in the country did. So those, or Act 250 or
Yeah.
so those are the different aspects. This slide is simply noting that the largest gap between our funding and the work that we do shows up mostly around application fees and merchant generation.
Okay, thanks. John, last question.
Yeah, last question. So we can catch up offline if we need to. Here, I can get back to the committee on this, but kind of the range of application fees per project, and those vary here because some are small projects, some are much larger in nature and require more.
Sure. So for net metering registrations, it's $100 fee that is split between us and the department. So we get $40. For an amendment to one of those, which we have an increasing number of them are amendments to existing systems, the fee is $25, which means the commission gets $10, which doesn't begin to cover our costs. For a large project, it is based on the size of the project, a per KW fee. So for example, the 20 megawatt projects that you see here, they paid $100,000 and the commission received $40,000.
I remember going through all
Pretty
those
wide.
a few years ago,
Yes.
figuring that all out. So, yeah, great.
And I will just sort of reemphasize that this is what we're doing here, like the $40,000 for Fairhaven Solar, where there was almost, there was no intervention. It was very quick. It was vastly different than another 20 megawatt solar project with significant intervention, long hearings, everything else. So it's a very imprecise art that we're doing.
Right. Great. Well, thank you for all the work you are doing. We appreciate you coming in today, and John will be in touch as we have questions. So great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we're going to switch from the Public Utility Commission to the legislative budget. Thanks for your patience.
Since you know, and I'll send you a note just so you can follow it.
Finish up there.
I appreciate it.
I didn't have our friends from the Joint Fiscal Office here. Come sit up. You're going to sit over there. Okay. Scott, good morning, friend. Welcome all people in the legislative world. Always good to see you here. And Scott, if you want to introduce yourself for the record, get away.
The record, Scott Moore, Legislative Finance Manager for the Joint Fiscal Office.
So we have handout, and it's on your screen. I don't know if you want to share a screen or you just want to talk us through it.
I thought we can just talk through.
Okay, that sounds great. Just orient us to where you're going.
So before we get too much into the packet, a lot of you have had me before, you've seen this presentation where I felt this hasn't. So I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about our process. As you I'm sure have heard from many, many people that have come and talked about the budget. At the end of August or so, the budget instructions are presented to different agencies. Those budget instructions include when you develop the budget, try to have only a 3% increase. When the budget instructions came out, they also mentioned that there's an estimated 5% increase in healthcare. We have to incorporate any activities from the Pay Act, which was a 5.4% increase in salaries. And they were suggesting only a 3% increase in internal service fund costs. So with that in mind, we developed the budgets, and I went to all of the department heads, and we sat down and went bottom up as we do every year. And in that process, I really have two questions in my mind. One of which is, do they have the resources that they need to serve the General Assembly to the best of their ability? The second question is there anything we can cut? Is there anything we can trim? Is there anything that we can tighten up to make sure that we have that? Once we have that budget created for each of the different business units, do the same thing that all the other agencies do. We meet with finance and management and talk about what our estimated budgets are going to be. They did mention to us that the final numbers for internal service fund costs come out in mid to late December. But the one thing that we do that other agencies don't do is we then meet with the Joint Legislative Management Committee, present the budget, and get their input and get their approval. So what you see in this packet is memos that were presented to the JLMC about the budget, as well as updates after the final numbers came in for the internal service fund costs. So with that, I would love to turn you to the third page of the document, which is at the top, number one. But the first page is the cover, and then the table of contents, and then number one. This is our presentation for what the total cost would be. We can see here that we're estimating $25,685,794, which is a $1.1 million increase over the FY26 budget. I will call your attention to the title, the FY26 adjusted appropriation. Well, what does that mean? What's going on there? If you were to go look at statute from last year, the actual acts that were passed, and add up all the different 5 business units, you'd find out that the Legislative General Assembly budget across the entire legislature was $26,044,703, I believe it was. Well, this says $24,544,703. There's a $1.5 million difference there. If you recall, at the end of the session, we presented the budget, and then we added $1.5 million to the General Assembly budget for a couple of reasons. One, we had costs of the mezzanine, which were estimated at the time to be 1.1 million. I think the total number is about 1.2 million when we're all said and done. And honestly, you all are expensive. So about $300,000 a week. So going later in the session, we had, I believe, 3 weeks of additional costs, about $300,000.
It's even more than 3 weeks that we threw in, because we didn't know what was going to happen with the federal government, if we had to be called back into special session and things like that. So we budgeted an extra $1.5 million in the event that we had to. So we did talk about that last year, and so we didn't end up needing it, which is great.
By my quick back of the envelope math, I think the cost could have potentially been as much as 2.5 million if you add in the additional weeks plus the mezzanine and that kind of stuff. But I think we didn't need all that money, but of course, 1.5 million was added to the budget. Now, it kind of acted a little bit like a one-time appropriation, even though it was added to the base, if you will. But we didn't want to build that 3% increase on the budget with that extra $1.5 million, because that's not really fair, if you will. Right? I mean, we could have just added that and said, great, we have an extra $1.5 million, wonderful. Then we could use it. But that's not transparent, that's not fair across the organization. The $1.5 million could be used for lots of different programs. So we backed out the $1.5 million from the FY26 appropriation, just so you can kind of compare apples to apples.
Overview of fiscal year 2027 budget.
Not a problem. So that's why we see these numbers here comparing apples to apples. Now, the second thing I'd point out to your attention, if you look in the column that is change in percentage and change in dollar amount, it does look a little odd that the legislature is negative 2.5%, Reg Council is 20% increase, JFO is 8% increase. Knowing that that does look kind of odd, I'd like to point out that one of the things we have done with the legislature, the General Assembly budget, is we've taken the Office of Legislative Operations and we've divided up the duties and therefore the cost to the Joint Fiscal Office and to Leg Council. Essentially anything legislatively, support staff, committee assistance, all of that stuff went over to Leg Council. Anything fiscal, expense related, salary related, making sure you guys are taken care of, came over to JFO. In the process of moving the positions and the dollar amount for those positions, that's why you see these increases and decreases the way they were. So effectively, we took out about $900,000 from the General Assembly budget and divided that up amongst JFO and Leg Council.
And we did a lot of language, or rather, Bryn did a lot of language for us in the budget adjustment. We had 10 pages of making this happen. So now we're seeing how it looks in the FY27.
Exactly. So then that brings us to the bottom line here of 4.5% increase overall from FY26. I would like to also point out the FY27 reversion. As part of my portfolio of things I take care of, I take care of the capital bill. In the capital bill, we have a process, the repo committee, they call it. We go and claw back old money from one-time appropriations. So looking back at the legislative budget, anything that we had that's 2 years old or older for one-time appropriations for studies or leftover money that hadn't been spent, we're going to go look and bring it back and revert it back to the capital bill. Or not the capital bill, the budget. Do that in capital bill too. So this $17,000, in case you're curious, $17,000 was a basic needs technical advisory committee, leftover money there, and the $65 was for a renewable energy study, happened to be left over. So that's why it's a little bit of an odd dollar amount. Any questions on that first page before we get into the next bits and pieces of things? Going to the next page, which is page 2, this is the memorandum that was sent to the JLMC. You might say to me, Mr. Moore, I'm looking at this number here, and this $25 million number is not exactly the same. You just told me the increase is 1.1 million, but this only says $974,000. What's going on there? If you recall, I did mention that when Finance and Management gave us the budget instructions, they said these were going to be estimated cost increases. And then what happens is at mid to late December, they have final numbers for the internal service fund fees or fund costs, as well as any healthcare increases or anything else. So there's about $166,000 differential between what I presented to JLMC and what's happening now. I presented to JLMC December 12th, and I think the numbers came out December 17th. So if we waited one more week, we would. But this goes into a little bit more detail as to why there's increases. We can see in this paragraph here the growth. Approximately 88% of the overall budget growth is associated with the cost of the recent Pay Act, increases in health plans, corresponding percentages, like all of the FICA and the retirement is built off the salary. So if you increase the salary, lots of other things increase because they're built upon the percentages. And then the remaining 12% or so is increased in some IT operating expenses where we're just looking at other contracts where we have to have increases. Staff professional development where we had increased a little bit. And we did have lots of contracts that have multiple year contract rates. So when we contract with different third-party vendors, we try to lock in a rate for 2, 3, 4 years. Of course, each corresponding year might have a slight increase in the total costs. So essentially, it's 88% of their overall increase is people and 12% is stuff. As we go through onto page 3, we can talk about compensation and benefits changes. The staff had a 5.4% increase in their salary, which does, like I mentioned, talk about increases all across the board. At the time, it was projected 5% increase in healthcare, which I think is about the same, maybe 5.2. I'd have to look at the numbers again. And then the increased internal service funds. We did increase the total budget, I mentioned, by $166,000. About $127,000 of that was due to increased internal service fund costs. One thing we did want to point out was the Sergeant of Arms would like to have one additional position for a head tour guide. This position would be not benefited, but be part-time year-round, unbenefit position. That would cost about $25,000 total. Just so you have an idea about that. It's not a huge effect on the overall budget increase, but it is there
So that's in the budget.
for the budget.
Okay.
Then we can see here this legislative branch budgets by department. As I mentioned, about $900,000 wiggle woggle from the legislature to JFO and Ledge Council. And then we'll jump to the appendix in a minute so you can see what happens. But then the bottom of this memo are the proposed motions that JLMC has when they did their meeting. We jump to page 4, we can see these are the appendices. So I want to really just point this out that, first of all, this is before the BAA, so these numbers, we did meet here to talk about moving money back and forth within the BAA. But when we look at this, if we didn't have any legislative operations staffing changes, and we kept all the committee systems where they were, we kept all the operations coordinator where they were, and didn't have any changes whatsoever, this is what you would see. We have about 4% increase in legislature, 3.36 in legislative council, 3.71 in JFO, as opposed to the 19-20% we saw on the previous page. I wanted you to see what that looks like as if nothing had ever changed. And then we can see the bottom section. This is really when things change, right? So we're moving the money. So we increase the positions in one group versus the other, and we increase the money to pay for those positions.
And the number stays the same.
Total number stays the same, 3.97%. Now these numbers are a little bit, they're $166,000 short from the very first page because we have the increased internal service fund costs, as I mentioned before. And then because we did have increased costs, one of the motions was to present to the chair of the JLMC and the vice chair, here what the costs would be if we had increased costs that were needing review. They could call another meeting of the JLMC to go through them. $166,000 versus $16 million. If there's that much of an increase, we want to meet again. So this budget memo was given to them just saying, here's what happened. There's a slight increase. We can see here, $129,000 in internal service fees and $37,000 in increased healthcare rates from before. And then starting on page 7, we have nitty gritty, every single line item for every single budget. If you really want to know where the pens and pencils and, you know, celebratory birthday cakes and whatever else.
Excellent. Yes, and now that Maria's not there, more people, so other people have to do the baking or buy the baking. So it might be a baking increase.
And I'm happy to go through line by line if anybody has questions as to what changed or didn't change, but
Okay, I think we do have a question too.
Just a quick question, and this may be something that the Sergeant at Arms would need to respond to, but I'm just wondering, given the work to create single point entry in the building, are there costs in here associated with that, and you know, purchase of equipment, et cetera?
It's because they're Sergeant at Arms. The equipment, we are equipped. That's been paid for in previous budgets. The piece in our current budget that's already been approved is for any overtime or extra sheriffs that we need to hire to help us with our single point of entry on the days that we're doing it. But I think turn over to Scott to address any future expenses associated with continuing that project. We do have an estimate on what it would be. I can't remember where we landed on how we would request that money.
so when we look at that, if you were, I'm going to try to be delicate to not broadcast too many security details, but the associated cost depends a little bit on a number of factors.
The number of
Factors. Do we hire someone to be here all day, every day, outside consultant to come in during the session? Do we increase the current Capitol Police officers overtime to be able to man the door versus having somebody else come in? So there's some of those things in play. With that said, we did look at the total, what we think estimated costs might be. That total is not in this part of the budget. One of the things we also talked about was other potential security measures for the General Assembly members themselves. That is in this budget. But a single point of entry, we haven't increased this partly because trying to figure out what the total cost would be, going through joint rules and legislative management committee to see if this is approved or not approved. That has not yet been baked into this.
So we might see something in budget adjustment next year if we decide to do something for next legislative session that's different than what we're doing now.
Right.
Okay.
Some of it being capital budget.
This would be mostly operating costs, we think. So
They already have the equipment.
No, but are they doing any other physical changes to the?
if they, I don't believe we're going to be doing any other physical changes to the building for single point of entry. It's really just a matter of, a matter of having personal staff to run the X-ray machine, that kind of stuff.
You got it. 100% correct, Scott. We don't need any more investments for the infrastructure. We have the equipment. It would really be people cost.
And I don't want to get worms, but if there are State House capital expansion plans in the next 10, 20 years, of course, that would get a whole different set of security stuff. So that's
And
far.
that would be in the capital bill.
Yes.
That's
Not here, not right now.
Thank
part of the future plans.
I'm glad you're doing the random days of single point of entry. I
We are,
appreciate
and
that.
we are pretty clear in our recommendation that we should be doing it every day. So we're working on that.
Great. Well, we appreciate that you're doing all that. Committee, any other questions for Scott or for, we have other heads of all the legislative offices here? It's great to see you all. Dave?
Is there any way to do any comparative costs with other legislatures?
For what other legislators spend for their overall budget. I'm happy to go run some numbers and see what I can see.
Well, I don't want to make you chase things, but if I take the full cost of the budget and divide the number of legislators, quite a figure.
Keep in mind,
To support this
Yeah.
enterprise, which supports us.
it's true. There are about 100 or so legislative staff, and 180 of you, so I want to keep in mind, 280 versus 180 when you do math.
Yep, you're right. And when I was doing it, I forgot to sign it. So that was a lot.
Well, but the staff are supporting us, so that is a cost, so I understand how you would divide it by the number of legislators, because all of you are here in large part to support all of us, for which we're very grateful. So that is part of the cost of making
And I say
this.
100 because committee assistants are about 20. So I usually just use 100 as a nice round figure for leg staff.
So the transition of legislative operations, the split, has been going on for a little while now. Has that been going all right? Feels like it's okay.
Everything feels fine on my end. I know legislative council does have a committee assistants and she has more people to manage, but as far as I have actually less duties this session than last session, so I'm excited.
You're happy. How about Britt?
So for the record, Bryn here, Director, Chief Counsel, of Legislative Council, and from my perspective, yes, it's going quite well.
Good.
The attorneys and the committees often work together.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a natural partnership there that is fostered, through having all of the staff in one office. So
Good.
from my perspective, yes, it's achieving some efficiencies.
Yeah, I'm good. Glad that's working out. So, appreciate it. Go ahead.
I'm just feeling a little emotional seeing all of you sitting there. I mean, you've created a very special environment, and I think we're all really grateful for the work that you do, and the care that you put into this work and protecting us, in terms of personal safety and staffing these committees. Anyway, I'm grateful for all of you, and I know that that's widely shared. So,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you all. I think you've done a great job presenting it, and I don't think we have any more questions, but just like gratitude and thanks.
You know how to find me if you need anything.
We always do. Thanks, Scott. Yes.
Budget, and I've
It's Tom's budget.
been very good about reaching out, and if we have questions, it doesn't
Yeah.
sound like it's really complicated.
Yeah.
Budget, so.
Yeah, reach out to Tom, committee members, so great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Scott.
Welcome.
So I think it's a break time. Is it break time? You right, Paige?
Not really.
Okay.
In summer.
Okay, we have a break until 10:50.